She was bright, beloved, and full of plans. On a freezing January night, Madison Carter vanished without a trace after being turned away from a college nightclub. What began as a fun evening with friends spiraled into a nightmare that would grip an entire town. As investigators combed the streets, CCTV revealed chilling footage, and soon, the truth began to emerge. A shadow was prowling Riverdale's quiet neighborhoods, watching, waiting, ready to strike. Who was the man in the silver sedan? And why did Madison never make it home? This isn't just a missing person case. This is a predator's hunt, caught on camera. Madison Carter was the kind of person who lit up a room without even trying. At 21 years old, she had already left a deep impression on everyone who crossed her path. Friends described her as wickedly funny, sharp-witted, and incredibly inclusive. She had that rare kind of charm, not flashy or loud, but grounded real. People gravitated toward her, not because she demanded attention, but because she made them feel seen. Born and raised in a quiet suburb just outside of Indianapolis, Madison was the oldest of 4 children. She was the big sister who packed school lunches, helped with homework, and knew exactly how to cheer up her younger siblings when they had a bad day. To her parents, Lisa and Russell Carter, she wasn't just their daughter, she was the glue that held their family together. Her father once called her an old soul in a young body, and her mom used to say she had a heart too big for one person. Madison had always been bright, the kind of student who didn't just memorize information but questioned it. She had a deep love for philosophy, even as a teenager, often staying up late journaling about free will, morality, and the meaning of life. Her teachers described her as focused, perceptive, and self-driven, but also someone who pushed herself harder than anyone else ever could. That drive, while admirable, came with a price. By the time she reached her senior year of high school, Madison had begun quietly struggling with an eating disorder. She never talked about it openly, not with her friends, not even with her parents, but her weight loss, exhaustion, and perfectionism became harder to ignore. She was battling demons no one could fully see. Still, she persisted. She fought through it all, earned top grades, and was accepted into the University of Riverdale, her dream school, to study philosophy. Lisa had reservations about her going so far away from home. As any mother would, she worried that the stress of college life, the pressure to be perfect, and the distance might trigger a relapse. But Madison insisted she was ready. She wanted a fresh start. And so, in a bold move of independence, she took a gap year before college and spent 3 months traveling across Europe. She walked through the streets of Paris, journaled from train stations in Prague, and found pieces of herself in quiet museums and bustling cafes. By the time she returned, she was changed. More confident, more settled. She moved into her campus housing at Riverdale full of hope, ready for a new chapter. Her roommates became her second family, and she quickly built a strong support system. Madison thrived in the intellectual environment. She debated professors with respectful conviction, led late-night study sessions, and somehow made even the driest philosophical texts feel alive. Outside the classroom, she was just as engaged. She joined a creative writing club, volunteered at a women's shelter, and spent weekends hiking nearby trails with her boyfriend, Connor. They had been together for 3 years, a quiet, grounded kind of love that gave both of them stability. Connor once said, "It's hard to explain Madison to people. You just have to meet her. She's curious in a way that makes you feel more curious too." But even with all of her accomplishments, Madison remained deeply humble. She never flaunted her intelligence or her experiences abroad. She listened more than she spoke. She was the friend who texted back at 2 a.m., who remembered your mom's birthday, who showed up with soup when you were sick. She had plans, big ones. After graduation, she wanted to travel again, maybe freelance as a journalist, maybe work with nonprofits. But more than anything, she just wanted to make a difference. And in many ways, she already had. By early 2019, Madison Carter's life looked like a well-written novel still unfolding. She had overcome darkness, chased purpose, and was finally happy, truly happy. But none of that would matter on the night she vanished into the cold streets of Riverdale. It was Thursday, January 31st. The temperature in Riverdale had dropped below freezing, and snow had quietly blanketed the sidewalks like a warning no one heeded. But for the college students gearing up for another night out, the cold was just background noise. Inside the shared house on North Whitaker Street, laughter echoed through the living room. Madison Carter, 21 years old and full of life, was in the center of it all. She'd had a tough semester. The pressure of maintaining high grades while managing her mental health hadn't been easy. But this night was a break. Just her housemates, music, a few drinks, and a plan to hit the canyon, a club every student knew and most had stumbled out of at some point. Madison was dressed simply, a black top, jeans, and a thin coat that didn't stand a chance against the wind. But her spirits were high. Friends later said she was the one making everyone laugh, playfully shouting over the music, pouring shots, talking about spring break and internships and the big world waiting after graduation. At around 10 p.m., she sent her boyfriend Connor a short message. "Good night. Leaving my phone at home. Talk tomorrow, Yellowheart." It would be the last text she ever sent. An hour later, the group walked down to the canyon. CCTV later captured their arrival. A cluster of excited students weaving through the line, ready for a night of dancing and noise. Madison, however, was clearly struggling. She stumbled, laughing too loudly, her coordination off. The club's security staff, used to dealing with intoxicated students, pulled her aside and turned her away. She'd had too much to drink. Her friends tried to argue at first, but it was clear she wasn't getting in. After a quick huddle, they decided to do what felt like the responsible thing, get her home safe and rejoin the party. They hailed a taxi, pooled their cash, and gave the driver Madison's address. One of them helped her into the back seat, gave the driver instructions, and shut the door. They watched the cab disappear down the road, and went back to their night, assuming she'd be tucked in bed before they even hit the dance floor. But what no one realized then, not her friends, not the cab driver, not even Madison herself, was that the next 60 minutes would determine everything. Because instead of stepping inside her house like she was supposed to, Madison never made it through the front door. According to the cab driver, he dropped her off as requested. He even saw her walking toward her porch before driving away. From his point of view, the job was done. But when investigators later pulled up footage from a street cam 2 blocks down, Madison was seen walking away from the house, not toward it. What made her turn back? No one knows. Maybe she lost her keys. Maybe the cold air felt sobering. Maybe she just wasn't ready for the night to end. What is certain is that from that moment on, she was alone. The streets of Riverdale that night were nearly empty. The wind had picked up, and the snow had begun to fall harder. The kind of snow that sticks in your eyelashes and soaks your socks. Madison wandered aimlessly. She was seen by 2 pedestrians curled up near a tree, crying. They approached her, concerned, but said she was incoherent and irritable, unwilling to engage. "I'm fine," she snapped. "I don't need help." Minutes later, a group of students noticed her standing near a fence along Carter Park. They offered her a place to warm up. Again, she refused. Still stumbling, still clearly confused, Madison walked on, further and further from safety. It's believed that by this point, she may have already begun experiencing early hypothermia, slurred speech, irrational behavior, difficulty walking, symptoms easily mistaken for drunkenness. At 11:37 p.m., a traffic camera on Millstone Avenue caught a blurry image of her figure, crossing the street diagonally, coat barely covering her against the wind. 3 minutes later, another camera picked up a sedan circling the block nearby. It would be hours before anyone noticed how often that car appeared in the area, and how closely its movements mirrored hers. By the time her friends began texting her at 3 a.m. to check in, Madison was already gone. Her phone lay untouched on her nightstand. Her keys, for reasons no one could explain, were later found buried in the snow near the side gate of her house. And the streets, now silent and covered in ice, held onto her footsteps, the only trace of where she'd been and what was coming next. At first, no one panicked. It wasn't unusual for a student to stay over at a friend's place or crash on a stranger's couch after a long night. But when the clock ticked past 3 a.m. and Madison still hadn't returned home, unease began to settle like frost on the windows of her shared house. Her housemates, who'd skipped the club that night, were the first to realize something was wrong. They hadn't seen Madison come in. Her room was undisturbed. Her phone still lay on her desk, untouched since she left it at 10 p.m. The front door was locked, and most disturbing of all, her keys were missing. That meant she hadn't made it inside. One of her roommates sent a group text to the rest of the friend group still out. "Hey, is Maddie with any of you?" The replies came quickly. "Nope. Didn't she go home in the cab? We put her in the taxi like 3 hours ago." The casual concern shifted to confusion. Then anxiety. They called the taxi company, who confirmed a driver had dropped off a young woman matching Madison's description at the right address, just after 11:15 p.m. The driver said she exited the vehicle, walked toward her house, and that was it. He hadn't waited to see her go in. Why would he? To him, it was just another drop-off on a busy Thursday night. Her friends began making calls, to other houses, to classmates who lived nearby, to anyone who might have seen her. Nobody had. Nobody had heard from her. She wasn't answering messages, because her phone wasn't even with her. Then came a second realization. Madison wasn't the kind of person to just disappear. She was responsible. Even on her worst days, she checked in. Always. If she stayed out, she let someone know. If she felt unsafe, she reached out. The radio silence wasn't just unusual. It was terrifying. At 4:12 a.m., one of her housemates called 911. Riverdale Police Department dispatched 2 officers to the residence within minutes. The call was logged as possible missing person, young female, last seen intoxicated. Officers canvassed the immediate area, searching alleyways and nearby yards. It had snowed heavier between midnight and 2 a.m., making footprints nearly impossible to track. What they found instead was more troubling: Madison's keychain, partially buried in the snow next to the side gate of her house. She had been there, but something or someone had stopped her from going inside. Within hours, more patrol units were called in. Police dogs attempted to pick up a scent trail, but freezing conditions made it difficult. Detectives interviewed every roommate, every friend who saw her that night. The timeline was reconstructed down to the minute. Madison left the house at 8:30 p.m. Got to the party by 9. Left for the club by 10:45. Refused entry at the canyon around 11:20. Placed into a taxi before 11:30. Dropped off near home before 11:40. And then nothing. Her trail simply evaporated. By midday Friday, missing person flyers were printed and distributed across campus. Detectives visited local businesses requesting CCTV footage. One property management office handed over security recordings that showed Madison walking alone along Millstone Avenue just before midnight. She appeared cold, dazed, and disoriented. Tips trickled in. Someone had seen a woman crying outside a gas station. Another claimed they spotted a girl sitting on a bench alone in the park. But nothing concrete. Nothing that explained where she went after her image faded from that camera. News spread like wildfire. Madison's smiling face, cropped from a vacation photo, filled every TV screen, every social media feed, every corner of Riverdale. The caption beneath her image read, "21-year-old college student missing after night out. Police urge public to come forward." Her parents, Dana and Roger Carter, were contacted and immediately drove overnight from their home in Ohio. By Saturday morning, they stood in front of a wall of microphones, voices shaking, trying to hold it together. "Maddie is our world," her mother said, eyes red-rimmed. "If anyone knows anything, even the smallest detail, we beg you please come forward. We just want her home." The police set up a dedicated tip line. Hundreds of volunteers gathered for search parties. Students passed out flyers at intersections and bus stops. Neighborhoods were canvassed. Outbuildings, garages, even storm drains were inspected. Nothing. Not a coat. Not a shoe. Not a single trace of Madison Carter. And then came the whispers. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she had a mental breakdown. Maybe she just wanted to disappear. But her family and friends pushed back, hard. Maddie was happy, her father said in a press conference. She had plans. She was excited about her future. She had no reason to just vanish. Police publicly agreed. "We are treating this as a high-risk missing person case," Chief Melissa Traynor stated. "And we are not ruling out foul play." Still, the hours ticked by. Then the days. Friday turned into Saturday. Then Sunday. The temperature dropped further, and so did hope. And somewhere, buried beneath the snow and silence of Riverdale's quiet streets, the truth waited, watching, as the town desperately searched for answers. As the hours turned into days and Madison Carter remained missing, the search effort in Riverdale began to escalate into something massive, urgent, unrelenting, and all-consuming. Police had already pieced together the first 90 minutes of her last known timeline. She left her friends, was refused entry at the Canyon nightclub, then sent home in a cab just before 11:30 p.m. But what happened after the drop-off was where the trail grew cold. That is, until the cameras started speaking. Riverdale, like most mid-sized college towns, had a patchwork of security cameras, some on local businesses, others mounted on traffic poles, and a few private systems on homes and apartment buildings. Detectives began combing through every frame, logging every movement, syncing every timestamp. At 11:37 p.m., a street cam on Millstone Avenue captured Madison crossing the road in the direction of her house. She wasn't running. She wasn't panicked. But her movements were unsteady, weaving side to side, her arms occasionally flailing for balance. Just 2 minutes later, another camera on a nearby property caught her walking along the sidewalk, glancing around. Her expression was hard to read, but something seemed off. She wasn't heading toward home anymore. She was drifting away from it. Then, at 11:40 p.m., 2 local residents walking their dog saw a young woman curled into a crouch near a snow-covered tree on the corner of Hawthorne and Birch. Concerned, they approached and asked if she needed help. The girl looked up at them with teary, distant eyes and muttered, "I'm fine." She then got up quickly and walked off, shoes crunching in the ice. They later told police they thought she might have been intoxicated or confused, but not in immediate danger. They regretted not calling someone. Just moments later, a group of university students spotted her again outside their off-campus apartment on Glenview Road. She was standing alone, arms wrapped around herself, visibly shaking. They opened the door and invited her inside to warm up, but she declined, muttering something incoherent before wandering off into the night. It was now well below freezing. Experts would later say Madison may have been in the early stages of hypothermia, disoriented, irrational, her body reacting to the cold by creating a false sense of warmth or paranoia. But what no one could have predicted was that she wasn't just being lost to the elements. She was being watched. When detectives reviewed more footage, they began to notice something strange. A silver sedan, an older model, repeatedly circling the neighborhood blocks. Once, twice, 5 times. Always slowing near corners. Always driving with deliberate calm. The car was first seen at 11:45 p.m. Then again at 11:55. Then at 12:04 a.m. And then at precisely 12:08 a.m., that same vehicle turned down Oak Hollow Road, a dimly lit street lined with woods and a small public park. Cameras caught Madison walking aimlessly along the sidewalk. The sedan pulled to the curb. A man exited the vehicle, crossed the street, and appeared to approach her. She hesitated. He stepped closer. After a brief pause, they both walked toward the passenger side of the car. The camera feed was grainy, but one detail stood out. Madison didn't look alarmed. She didn't try to run. And then at 12:11 a.m., the car drove off, with Madison inside. At first, detectives hoped maybe it was an acquaintance, someone who saw her struggling and offered help. But when they cross-referenced license plate data, no student or faculty name came up. No report of a Good Samaritan. No one had stepped forward to say they'd given her a ride. It was a ghost vehicle. That changed everything. Suddenly, this was no longer just a missing person case. It was, in the words of lead investigator Mark Dupree, a potential abduction in real time, unfolding on digital breadcrumbs. CCTV later tracked that same vehicle pulling into the entrance of Oak Hollow Fields, a large wooded recreation area just minutes from where the screaming had been reported. A nearby resident told officers he had been jolted awake around 12:15 a.m. by the sound of a woman's scream, sharp, high-pitched, and cut short. He remembered the exact time, because he had checked his phone immediately after. When he looked out his window, he saw a man walking briskly back to the car, parked near the trees. The car remained stationary for another 10 minutes. Its headlights flicked on at 12:25 a.m. Then it pulled out of the field, turned onto Meadowbrook Drive, and disappeared from view. When detectives revisited the footage of that same area 2 hours later, at around 2:30 a.m., they saw something chilling. The same silver sedan returned to the park entrance, paused briefly, then turned around and drove off again. Why return? Detectives had one theory: to clean up, to check if anything had been left behind, or worse, to hide a body. Around the same time, another incident occurred just 2 miles away. 2 women walking home from a bar reported that a man had stepped out from behind a dumpster and began masturbating in front of them. They were horrified. They called 911 immediately and gave a detailed description of the man, his car, and the license plate. It was a match. Same man, same car, same night. And now police had a face. Within 24 hours, the car was traced to a 24-year-old butcher named Lucas Nowak, a Polish immigrant, married, father of 2, living less than a mile from where Madison was last seen. When police knocked on his door, he looked stunned, but not surprised. That night, the cameras had told a story. And now that story had a suspect. When news broke that Madison Carter may have entered a stranger's vehicle, and never been seen again, the mood in Riverdale shifted. What started as a hopeful search for a missing college student now took on a darker, more urgent tone. The police still publicly labeled it as a missing persons investigation. But behind closed doors, detectives had begun preparing for the worst. The footage didn't lie. Madison had gotten into that silver sedan willingly or unknowingly. And that car belonged to a man who, just hours later, had exposed himself to 2 young women. It didn't take a behavioral analyst to connect the dots. This was not a case of a lost student. This had all the hallmarks of a predator, one who had been hunting long before that night. Police arrested Lucas Nowak the following day on suspicion of public indecency. He gave them the same calm, eerily emotionless demeanor that would become his trademark. He didn't ask why he was being arrested. He didn't even deny the allegations. When questioned about the events of that night, he claimed he had no knowledge of Madison Carter. Didn't know her. Hadn't seen her. Had no idea what the detectives were talking about. But when investigators placed surveillance stills in front of him, images of Madison walking into his car, his own vehicle driving into the woods, his story shifted. Slightly. Now he said he did pick up a young woman matching Madison's description. She looked cold, lost, and confused, and he just wanted to help. He said he offered her a ride. That she accepted. That he drove her to Oak Hollow Fields, and she got out. Alone. Alive. Unharmed. He said he never touched her. He even described himself as a good Samaritan. But detectives weren't buying it. Neither was Madison's family. Her mother Dana sat in a press conference the next day, flanked by her husband and a wall of missing posters. Her hands trembled as she gripped the podium. Her voice cracked but did not break. Madison wouldn't just get into a stranger's car, she said. She was smart. She was cautious. She had no reason to go with anyone she didn't know, especially in the middle of the night, in freezing temperatures. Dana Carter begged the public to come forward with any detail, no matter how small. If you saw something, if you heard something, if you drove past that park, please help us. We can't sleep. We can't breathe. We just want our daughter back. The plea worked. Tips began to pour in. A woman who lived near the park reported hearing screaming around 12:15 a.m. Her husband backed it up. He'd been the one to check the time. Another man who jogged in the area said he saw a silver car parked unusually deep into the tree line that morning, before sunrise. A local dog walker mentioned noticing tire tracks and something shiny, maybe broken glass or a reflective object, near the trailhead. All of it pointed back to the same place, Oak Hollow Fields, and to the same man, Lucas Nowak. But the physical evidence was still thin. There was no blood, no clothing, no sign of a struggle. Madison's body hadn't been found. Without it, the police couldn't charge Lucas with anything beyond indecency or obstruction. That didn't mean they weren't building their case. They searched his car. What they found inside chilled even the most seasoned officers. Hidden under the front passenger seat was a bag. Inside, used condoms, women's underwear, some soiled, some torn, along with photographs taken through windows, clearly without consent. One image showed a woman brushing her hair in a bathroom. Another showed a couple asleep in bed. These weren't downloaded from the internet. They were personal, local, real. In the trunk, detectives uncovered a black hoodie, latex gloves, a flashlight, and rope. This wasn't a random pervert. This was a man with a pattern, a plan, a purpose. Digging deeper, they discovered Lucas had been reported multiple times in the past 2 years, peering through windows, following women home, entering homes uninvited. But because he had no prior convictions, his name never triggered any red flags. DNA swabs collected in previous voyeurism cases had been sitting in backlog, untested. Now those samples were rushed into priority status. And one by one, they began to match. Lucas Nowak wasn't just the last person seen with Madison Carter. He was likely responsible for a string of sexual offenses dating back to 2017. And all of them had occurred within a 5-mile radius of campus. Still, without Madison, without a body, there was no murder case. Not yet. Investigators returned to the park, combing the woods with cadaver dogs, sonar equipment, even drones. They drained a portion of the creek that ran behind the trees. Nothing. They searched Nowak's house, his yard, his crawlspace. They brought in thermal scanners, luminol, scent detection units. Still, no trace of Madison. But the evidence, circumstantial though it was, had become overwhelming. The time, the location, the behavior, the lies, the sexual history, it all pointed to one conclusion. Madison had not walked away from that park. And deep down, her family already knew. "I keep telling myself she's out there," her father told a reporter. "But I think we've crossed a line now. This doesn't feel like a rescue anymore. It feels like a recovery." Riverdale had turned from a town gripped by hope to one frozen by dread. Posters began to fade and tear in the wind. Candlelight vigils were held on campus. Students walked in groups. Women carried pepper spray. Everyone watched their windows a little more closely, because a predator had walked among them. And he wasn't done yet. 6 days had passed since Madison Carter vanished into the frigid darkness of Riverdale. Search crews had scoured every inch of Oak Hollow fields. Flyers covered telephone poles and coffee shop windows. Her photo, youthful, smiling, full of promise, had become impossible to ignore. But what the public didn't yet know was that detectives were on the verge of a major breakthrough. It began not with a confession or even a new eyewitness, but with a tip from a man named Anthony Keller, a father of 3 who lived just a block and a half from the park. Anthony had read about the screaming that was heard the night Madison disappeared. Something about it gnawed at him. He hadn't heard a scream, but he did remember something else. That night, he'd been woken up by his infant daughter crying around 12:20 a.m. He'd walked into the nursery to rock her back to sleep, and while doing so, looked out the window facing the street. That's when he saw it, a silver sedan, parked awkwardly near the edge of the woods, with its headlights off. What caught his attention wasn't just the car's location, but the figure standing beside it. A man, pacing, glancing around. Anthony couldn't see his face clearly, but he remembered the way the man kept opening the passenger side door, then closing it again, as if in hesitation. He noted the time on his phone, 12:22 a.m. After a minute or two, the man got in, turned on the lights, and drove off slowly without urgency. When Anthony saw the same model of car featured in the news the next day, a silver 2004 Chevy Impala, his heart sank. He called the tip line immediately. Within an hour, detectives were knocking on his door. This testimony gave investigators something crucial: a second sighting of the suspect vehicle at the exact time frame and location they suspected something terrible had occurred. It wasn't just Madison entering the car on camera. It was now a credible witness seeing the same vehicle near the field shortly after screams had been reported. But that wasn't all. At around the same time, a team reviewing older surveillance footage found something deeply disturbing. The silver Impala, now confirmed to be registered to Lucas Nowak, had been recorded on multiple residential security cameras throughout the week leading up to Madison's disappearance. It was always in motion, circling blocks, slowing down near parks, driving through alleyways behind student apartments. Sometimes it would disappear for 20 minutes, then return. The pattern repeated itself night after night, often past midnight, even in freezing temperatures. One resident had actually reported the vehicle to campus security 5 days before Madison vanished. A young woman had seen it idling outside her building around 1 a.m. She had taken a blurry photo of the plate, but no follow-up had been done. Now that photo became evidence. It was undeniable. Lucas had been prowling for days. And then came the most damning footage of all. A street-facing home near Oak Hollow had a camera pointed across a small stretch of road leading into the park. Though the camera's resolution was poor, it had one major advantage: continuous recording without motion triggers. It captured hours of video without interruption. On the night Madison disappeared, the footage showed the Impala turning onto the gravel path at 12:08 a.m. For minutes later, a figure matching Madison's height was seen walking beside the car. 2 minutes after that, both the figure and the vehicle were out of view. But at exactly 12:14 a.m., the same time the neighbor reported hearing screams, a second camera, placed across the street from the woods, picked up something else: movement in the trees. A shadow, then headlights flashing through the branches, then nothing. This correlation was the break detectives had been waiting for. 2 independent witnesses, 2 surveillance feeds, a consistent timeline. They now had a name, a face, a license plate, and critically, a narrowing window of time in which the crime could have occurred. It was at this point that authorities decided to release a portion of the footage to the public. They held a press conference urging anyone who had been in or near Oak Hollow Fields between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. on the night of January 31st to come forward, especially drivers with dash cams. The announcement generated more than 300 new tips in 24 hours. One of them came from a rideshare driver named Kareem Johnson. Kareem had picked up a passenger near Glenview Road around 12:35 a.m., not far from where Madison had last been seen. He didn't think much of the night until he reviewed his dash cam footage after seeing the police broadcast. And what he discovered sent chills down his spine. As he waited for his passenger to exit their apartment, his camera captured a silver sedan pulling out of Oak Hollow Fields and slowly passing in front of his car. The driver's face was briefly illuminated by Kareem's headlights. It matched Nowak's. This placed him exiting the field at the same time Madison would have still been alive, or perhaps just minutes after she wasn't. It also suggested something else. Lucas hadn't been fleeing in panic. He'd been calm, controlled, like a man who'd done this before. All the pieces were coming together, but one piece remained missing: Madison. And until they found her, or her body, prosecutors couldn't bring the charge her family feared was most appropriate. Still, the pressure was building. What had once been a subtle inquiry was now the largest missing persons investigation in Riverdale's history. Federal agents joined the task force. Thermal drones flew nightly over fields, waterways, and marshes. Divers combed the edges of Lake Eleanor. Tips were routed through an FBI database. Everyone, from volunteers to forensic experts, was pushing toward the same goal: find Madison. Find out what happened in those missing minutes. Because now, for the first time, there was a sliver of hope, and a trail that finally pointed in one direction, toward a man who had lurked for too long in the shadows. 7 days. That's how long Madison Carter had been missing. 7 days of anguish, of desperate searching, of unanswered questions. But as the sun set on the 7th day, Riverdale police prepared to make their move. They weren't just dealing with a missing person anymore. They believed they were staring into the face of her abductor. At exactly 6:42 p.m. on February 7th, a team of plainclothes officers arrived outside a modest beige house on Aspen Street. The home was unremarkable, a small, 2-story rental tucked between nearly identical homes. Nothing about it screamed danger. But inside lived 24-year-old Lucas Nowak, the man police now considered their primary suspect in Madison's disappearance. The plan was coordinated and swift. Officers knocked on his door under the pretense of following up on a previous indecent exposure charge. When Lucas answered, he appeared calm, even friendly. He stepped outside willingly and offered no resistance as officers placed him under arrest. "What is this about?" he asked quietly. "You know what this is about," one detective replied. Lucas was placed in the back of a cruiser and transported to Riverdale Police Headquarters. Simultaneously, forensic teams descended on his home. They executed a full search warrant, not just for the property but for his car, garage, personal electronics, and even the storm drain in his backyard. Neighbors watched in stunned silence. Many had known Lucas for years. He was a husband, a father of 2, a man who mowed his lawn on Sundays and waved at the mailman. He worked at a local butcher shop, volunteered once at a food pantry, and often posted pictures of his kids on social media. But behind the smile was a history no one saw, or no one wanted to. Inside the house, investigators found little at first glance. It was clean, tidy, normal, but the real discovery lay in the garage and inside his vehicle. The silver 2004 Chevy Impala, the same car seen picking Madison up that night, was processed with luminol. Within minutes, multiple areas of the back seat and trunk glowed blue, indicating the presence of bodily fluids. It wasn't blood, but it was enough. Officers bagged the upholstery, the floor mats, and even the trunk lining for forensic testing. Then, beneath the spare tire compartment, they found a small duffel bag, the same one that had previously surfaced in the initial search. Inside were more disturbing items: lingerie that didn't belong to Lucas's wife, women's jewelry, a flip phone with a cracked screen, and a USB drive labeled private. The drive contained hundreds of photos, many taken through windows. Others appeared to be from hidden cameras. One showed a woman brushing her teeth. Another, a college student undressing in her dorm. These were not screenshots or downloads. They were personal, real, local. And then there were the journals. Handwritten. Dozens of pages. In them, Lucas described night walks. He detailed how he would hunt, his word, in the early hours of the morning, circling neighborhoods, waiting for lights to go out. He wrote about the thrill of watching, about the moment she looks up and doesn't see you, but you see everything. It was enough to turn the stomachs of seasoned detectives. But still, Madison wasn't there. In the interview room, Lucas sat across from 2 lead investigators. They played the footage, the camera showing Madison getting into his car. They laid out printed stills of his vehicle entering Oak Hollow Fields. They showed the timeline of his return, 2 hours later. And they asked him directly, "What happened to Madison Carter?" At first, Lucas denied everything. He said he didn't know the girl, had never seen her before. The footage must have been someone else. But when confronted with his license plate, and with the photo from Kareem Johnson's dash cam showing him behind the wheel, his story shifted. Now, he admitted that he had picked her up, that she seemed cold, that he was just trying to help. He claimed he offered to take her home, but she wasn't making sense. So according to Lucas, he drove her to the park to let her cool off. He said she got out on her own, that she walked away into the woods, and he drove home. That was it. Did you touch her? No. Did you harm her? Absolutely not. So why did you return to the park at 2:30 in the morning? Lucas didn't answer. He stared at the floor, then at the wall, then finally back at the detectives and said, "I wanted to see if she was okay." But no one believed him. By now, police had obtained results from the lab. DNA recovered from the car matched Madison's. Her hair, skin cells, found on the passenger seat, on the handle of the rear door, and critically, in the trunk. Lucas was no longer a helpful bystander. He was now a suspect in a suspected homicide. That same night, police held a press conference. Chief Melissa Traynor addressed the community. "We have arrested Lucas Nowak in connection with the disappearance of Madison Carter. While Madison has not yet been located, the evidence we've gathered strongly suggests that she is the victim of a violent crime. This investigation is now being treated as a criminal matter. We will continue to search for Madison and ask the public for any assistance they can provide." The news sent shockwaves across the state. Riverdale residents lit candles outside City Hall. College students held vigils on the quad. Local businesses posted signs that read, "Justice for Madison." Her parents, visibly shaken but resolute, released a statement. "We are heartbroken, but we will not give up. We believe our daughter will be found. We believe the truth will come out. And we believe that those responsible will face justice." Lucas Nowak, for the first time since his arrest, showed something unexpected. Not fear, not remorse, but indifference. No emotion when he heard Madison's name. No reaction when told her DNA was found in his trunk. He sat in silence, as if detached from the horror he had orchestrated. But the silence would not protect him. Riverdale wanted answers. Her family wanted peace. And now, the justice system would demand both. It was the phone call her family had both prayed for and dreaded. On the morning of March 23rd, exactly 51 days after Madison Carter vanished, a fisherman casting lines along the banks of the Delta River spotted something tangled in the reeds near the shoreline. At first, he thought it was debris, maybe an old coat or discarded bedding swept down from upstream. But as he moved closer, his stomach twisted. It wasn't fabric. It was skin. Pale. Bloated. Unmoving. Within an hour, Riverdale police had cordoned off the area. Crime scene technicians descended in hazmat suits. News vans lined the shoulder of the access road. Helicopters hovered above the treetops. A body had been found, and it didn't take long to confirm who it was. She was wearing the same jeans, the same dark top she'd last been seen in. Around her neck, remarkably still intact, was a delicate silver necklace with the letter M for Madison. Her mother had given it to her on her 18th birthday. It was supposed to bring her luck. Instead, it would help identify her body. The news broke later that afternoon. Chief Melissa Traynor took the podium, her voice solemn. "With profound sorrow, we can now confirm that the body recovered from the Delta River this morning has been positively identified as Madison Carter, aged 21. Our thoughts are with her family, her friends, and the entire Riverdale community during this tragic time." Her parents were informed in private, away from the cameras. Dana collapsed when she heard the words. Roger stood frozen. Then slowly he walked to a window, stared into the gray sky, and whispered, "We knew, but we didn't want to believe it." For days, the community had clung to hope, some small miracle, some last-minute twist. But now there was only grief. Vigils turned into memorials. Posters were taken down. Flowers replaced flyers. Riverdale was mourning a daughter, a friend, a student, a life stolen. The autopsy report came 2 days later. It confirmed what detectives feared. Madison had been raped. The condition of her body, submerged in freezing water for over 7 weeks, made it difficult to determine exact cause of death. The medical examiner cited severe decomposition and environmental damage. But signs pointed to asphyxiation or drowning. Whether she had been alive when placed in the river remained inconclusive. But one thing was clear: her death had not been an accident. Traces of Lucas Nowak's DNA were found inside her body. On her clothes, on the fibers beneath her nails, there were bruises consistent with restraint. Her necklace was damaged, the clasp nearly broken, as if torn in a struggle. This wasn't a case of abandonment. This wasn't a girl who wandered off. This was murder. Police now had what they needed to move forward. 2 weeks later, Lucas Nowak was officially charged with the rape and murder of Madison Carter. When the charges were read aloud in the courtroom, he barely flinched. He pleaded not guilty, maintained his version of events, that the sex had been consensual, that Madison had walked away unharmed. But the evidence told a different story. Her phone still at home, her keys in the snow, her body in the river, the matching DNA, the surveillance footage, the pattern of behavior, the lies, all of it painted a chilling picture. For Madison's family, there was no comfort in the confirmation. Only silence. Only the unbearable weight of absence. She was terrified of water, Dana Carter later told a reporter. Even as a child, she'd panic if her face got wet. The thought of her ending up in a river, it haunts me. The town of Riverdale held a candlelight vigil the night after the announcement. Thousands gathered along the banks where Madison had been found. They stood shoulder to shoulder, bundled in coats, faces lit by flickering flames. Many sobbed. Others stood in quiet disbelief. Her father spoke briefly. "Thank you for loving her," he said. "Thank you for searching. And thank you for not forgetting her. We will carry her with us. Always." The vigil ended with a moment of silence. And then from the darkness came a single voice, singing softly, trembling, "Amazing Grace." Others joined in, slowly, then stronger, until the entire riverbank was filled with the sound of a community saying goodbye. Madison Carter had been found. But for her family, and for Riverdale, the story was far from over. By the time Lucas Nowak stepped into the courtroom in January of the following year, the name Madison Carter had become synonymous with tragedy, heartbreak, and a demand for justice. The trial had been delayed for months due to legal motions, forensic backlogs, and a public health crisis that halted the court system across the state. But when the proceedings finally began, Riverdale held its breath. The courthouse was packed on day one. Journalists, students, grieving neighbors, and supporters of the Carter family filled every available seat. Outside, people stood behind barricades in silence, holding candles and signs that read "Justice for Madison" and "Her voice matters." Lucas appeared calm, disturbingly so, clean-shaven, suit and tie, his expression blank. No emotion, no remorse. His lawyers entered a plea of not guilty on both counts, rape and murder. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Claire Hastings, wasted no time. In her opening statement, she stood before the jury and said, "Madison Carter was not just a student. She was not just a daughter. She was a young woman with a future, and that future was stolen by a man who had spent years hiding in plain sight. This was not a random act. This was the culmination of years of predatory behavior." On the night of January 31st, Lucas Nowak didn't just see Madison, he selected her. What followed was 2 weeks of devastating, detailed testimony. The prosecution laid out their timeline minute by minute. They walked the jury through every piece of evidence. The footage of Madison entering Nowak's car at 12:08 a.m., the dash cam capturing him leaving the field at 12:26 a.m., his return at 2:31 a.m., the DNA found inside Madison's body, her hair in his trunk, the journal entries where Lucas described hunting and observing without being seen, the USB drive filled with invasive photographs, the bag of women's underwear hidden beneath his spare tire. They also played audio from the interview room, Lucas shifting stories, his evasions, his emotionless tone. Then came the witness testimonies. The 2 women who had encountered him that same night, the ones who reported him for public indecency, took the stand. Their voices were steady, but their hands trembled. One recalled the way Lucas stared at them, completely unfazed, as if their fear meant nothing. A woman from 2 years earlier testified that she woke up to find Lucas watching her through her bedroom window. Another described how her roommate screamed when she discovered him crouched outside their apartment patio at 3 a.m. Each account chipped away at the image of the mild-mannered butcher, the quiet husband, the so-called family man. By the end of week 2, the jury had heard from forensic analysts, criminal profilers, and the search team who found Madison's body. They saw maps, thermal imaging scans, and 3D renderings of the park and river. It was a case built on precision and heartbreak. The defense, for their part, had little room to maneuver. Their core argument hinged on consent. Lucas had admitted to having sex with Madison, but claimed it was mutual. His lawyers said he found her wandering, cold, and emotional, and that what happened in the field was an act of compassion that turned intimate. They pointed to the lack of injuries consistent with violent struggle, the inconclusive cause of death, and the absence of eyewitnesses to the act itself. But the prosecution hit back hard. They brought in a hypothermia expert who explained that Madison, likely already in the early stages of exposure, would have been disoriented, unable to give meaningful consent or to resist. They reminded the jury that her phone had been left at home, her keys dropped in the snow, she wasn't in a state to consent to anything. They also reminded the court that Lucas Nowak didn't call 911. He didn't drive her home. He didn't tell anyone she was in danger. Instead, he returned to the scene hours later and dumped her body in the river. On the 11th day, Madison's mother Dana was called to the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she spoke. "I raised my daughter to be careful," she said. "She was strong, smart, and good. And I know in my heart that she did everything she could that night to survive. But he took that away from her." When asked what justice meant to her, Dana replied, "Justice isn't just a prison sentence. It's making sure no other family sits where I am. It's making sure that when someone shows patterns of predatory behavior, they're stopped, not after the body is found." On the 12th day, closing arguments were made. District Attorney Hastings stood before the jury and said, "You've seen the footage. You've read the journal. You've heard the screams. There is only one reasonable conclusion. Lucas Nowak is guilty of raping and murdering Madison Carter. And Madison deserves your voice. Because hers was taken." The defense countered with the same argument: lack of clear cause of death, a short timeline, and the possibility of a tragic misunderstanding. But it rang hollow. The jury deliberated for 5 days. On the afternoon of the 5th day, they filed back into the courtroom. The foreperson stood, heart racing, as the judge asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor. We have." And in a voice that shook the walls, she read, "We, the jury, find the defendant Lucas Nowak guilty of rape in the 1st degree. We, the jury, find the defendant Lucas Nowak guilty of murder in the 1st degree." Gasps filled the room. Madison's mother wept. Her father held her hand so tightly it turned white. Lucas Nowak remained still, no reaction. No regret. 2 weeks later, during sentencing, the judge delivered his final words. "Mr. Nowak, you preyed on women for years. You hunted them. You watched them. And then, when you saw Madison Carter, alone, cold, vulnerable, you made your move. This court finds you to be a dangerous, remorseless predator. You are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Justice, at last, had been served. But for Madison's family, it wasn't an ending. It was simply a marker, the point where grief no longer competed with uncertainty. She was gone, but her voice, through the fight for justice, would never be silenced again. The trial was over. The sentence had been passed. Lucas Nowak would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But for Dana Carter, Madison's mother, there was no closure, no sense of peace. Because while justice had been served for her daughter, the system that allowed Lucas to operate for so long remained untouched. It didn't sit right with her. Lucas had been reported numerous times over the years, peering into windows, following women, exposing himself on the streets. He'd been investigated, even fingerprinted. But nothing ever stuck. No charges, no convictions, no monitoring. His behavior was written off as minor, non-contact, not enough to prosecute. But to Dana, that was the root of the problem. "He didn't wake up one day and decide to murder my daughter," she told a reporter. "He escalated, slowly, predictably, and no one stopped him. The system didn't stop him. That's what I want to change." And so began Dana Carter's second fight, not just as a grieving mother, but as an advocate. Within months of the verdict, she launched the Madison Carter Foundation, focused on sexual assault prevention and legal reform. Her first mission, to push for legislative change regarding non-contact sexual offenses, behaviors like voyeurism, public indecency, stalking, and window peeping. Too often, these crimes were treated as nuisances, ticketable offenses, not indicators of deeper danger. Dana wanted to shift the conversation from harmless to warning sign. She began speaking publicly, at town halls, college campuses, conferences, and survivor support groups. Her message was always clear. If someone watches women through windows, if they expose themselves in public, if they follow people home, that is not harmless. That is predatory. And if we don't treat it seriously, we're just waiting for the next tragedy. The movement gained traction. Survivors came forward, people who had reported the same behaviors and were ignored. Victims of stalkers. Students who were watched, filmed, followed, but never protected. Even law enforcement began to reconsider. The Riverdale Police Department initiated a review of how non-contact offenses were handled, promising new protocols, early intervention, and stronger collaboration with prosecutors. And then, in a moment no one expected, Dana Carter received an invitation to Washington, D.C. She met with federal lawmakers, presented Madison's case before a Senate subcommittee, and sat across the table from the U.S. Attorney General. With shaking hands but unwavering resolve, she laid out a list of proposals. A national database to track repeat non-contact offenders. Mandatory forensic testing in all voyeurism cases. Harsher sentencing guidelines for public indecency when patterns are present. Victim notification if a suspect is linked to multiple cases. The media picked it up. Her testimony went viral. Hashtags like #NotMinor and #JusticeForMadison trended nationwide. But Dana wasn't looking for attention. She was looking for change. In the following year, several states introduced new legislation inspired by her advocacy. One of the most notable was the Carter Act, passed in 3 states, which mandates mandatory background checks and tracking for repeat offenders of sexual nuisance crimes, and allows prior non-contact behavior to be presented in court during trials for violent sexual assault. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And for Dana, it meant her daughter's name stood for more than tragedy. It stood for transformation. Madison didn't die in vain, she said at a press conference marking the 1-year anniversary of the verdict. If the law sees what we couldn't before, if even one woman is protected, then that's something. That's her legacy. Riverdale University established a scholarship in Madison's name. Survivors wore bracelets that read, "Her voice matters." And across the country, parents told their daughters Madison's story, not just as a warning, but as a call to be seen, believed, and protected. Dana Carter never stopped grieving, but she had found a way to turn that grief into purpose. He silenced her, she once said, but he didn't get the last word. Madison did. A year after the verdict, on a quiet spring evening in Riverdale, the Carter family returned to Oak Hollow Fields, the last known place their daughter had been alive. There were no reporters this time. No flashing cameras. Just family, close friends, and a gentle wind rustling through the trees. They gathered under the same oak where searchers had once stood, and where so many prayers had been whispered into the cold night air. Beneath that tree now stood a simple wooden bench, freshly carved, with a plaque that read, "In loving memory of Madison Carter." She walked with light, even in the darkest places. Dana Carter ran her hand over the lettering. Her voice was quiet, but clear. This is where she was lost. But now, it's where she can be remembered. Where she can rest. Her father placed a single yellow flower beneath the bench. Yellow had been Madison's favorite color. She used to say it felt like hope. One by one, friends shared memories. Her roommate talked about late-night dance parties in their pajamas. Her professor spoke of Madison's sharp wit and relentless curiosity. Her boyfriend, Connor, eyes glassy, recalled how she used to leave notes in his backpack just to say, "You've got this." They laughed. They cried. They remembered not how she died, but how she lived. Then, as the sun began to dip behind the treeline, Dana took a deep breath and turned to the small crowd. "I want to thank you," she said. "Not just for being here tonight, but for standing with us when we couldn't stand on our own. For every candle, every flyer, every message, every hug. For believing in justice when we were afraid it might not come." Madison felt loved in life, and she is still loved now. That means everything. She paused, then added, "And if there's one thing I want the world to take from her story, it's this: never ignore the little signs. Never call fear an overreaction. And never stop fighting for those who can't fight for themselves." As night fell and candles flickered once more, the community sat in silence. And in that stillness, Madison Carter's light lived on. Thank you for watching Madison Carter's story, a story that began with a night out and ended with a community forever changed. If this case moved you, if it made you think about the safety of those around you, please don't let it end here. Share her story. Talk about the warning signs. Speak up when something feels wrong. And most importantly, help us keep her memory alive. If you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case that matters. Here, we tell the stories that need to be told, not just to remember the victims, but to make sure their voices echo louder than the silence they were left in. This is True Crime Uncovered. We'll see you in the next story.